4 years of loyalty, millions in revenue generated, and still, Jared Monroe was told next quarter maybe. Each dismissal chipped away at his patience until one final meeting pushed him too far. When a competitor offered him respect and a life-changing opportunity, Jared made a choice that would shatter his old company's reputation. But no one expected how he would strike back. Have you ever felt undervalued despite giving everything to your work? Share your thoughts below. Your story might inspire someone else to stand up for their worth, just like Jared did. My name is Jared Monroe. I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how I walked away from being overlooked and turned quiet frustration into the best decision of my career. Jared Monroe sat across from Denise Callahan in her glass-walled corner office, the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights pressing into the silence like an unwelcome reminder of how sterile and transactional this place had become. Denise, impeccably dressed as always in a charcoal blazer and designer heels, barely glanced at him as she flipped through a thick folder of budget reports. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision, turning pages she probably hadn't read in detail. Strategic priorities have shifted, she said, her voice calm but with that clipped, dismissive tone she used when delivering bad news. We need to be strategic about compensation adjustments right now. Strategic. Jared had heard that word too many times in the past 4 years. It was Denise's polite way of saying no, her way of dressing up a refusal as if it were part of some grand plan. Keeping his posture straight, Jared forced himself to remain composed, though the familiar frustration churned beneath the surface. I understand, he replied carefully, but could we at least establish a specific timeline for revisiting this? It's been over a year since my last salary review, and I'd like some clarity. Denise finally looked up, locking her sharp brown eyes on him with that patronizing expression he had come to know all too well. Jared, she said, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms, you need to think about the bigger picture. We're all making sacrifices. You're not the only one carrying a heavy load here. The comment stung more than Jared wanted to admit. He kept his jaw tight and gave a practiced nod, the same one he'd given every time she had dodged this conversation in the past. Of course, he said flatly, forcing a polite smile. I appreciate your time. Denise offered him a thin smile in return, the kind that wasn't meant to reassure but to signal the end of the discussion. He stood, thanked her again out of habit, and left her office, feeling her eyes already back on the budget reports before he even reached the door. The walk back through the office felt longer than usual. Kelly, the receptionist, barely looked up as she scheduled client calls. The conference room was filled with younger consultants preparing presentations, their voices animated, hopeful, like his had been 4 years ago. Jared passed his own cubicle, pausing just long enough to glance at the stack of client files waiting for him. The Peterson Industries file sat right on top, marked with a yellow sticky note in Denise's neat handwriting. Handle the renewal negotiations. Make sure they understand our value proposition. Her value proposition, he thought bitterly, because he clearly wasn't worth even a cost of living adjustment, yet he was still the one expected to close million-dollar deals that lined her bonus check. The parking garage was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of motor oil and damp concrete. Jared sat in his old Honda Civic for 10 minutes before starting the engine, his hands resting motionless on the steering wheel. He stared at his reflection, faintly visible in the windshield. 4 years of loyalty, spotless performance reviews, and over $12 million, 0 cents in revenue brought in. And his salary hadn't moved since the day he was hired. Meanwhile, Denise drove a leased BMW, parked 2 spaces over, courtesy of the bonuses she earned from deals like the ones he managed. That evening, the hum of his laptop filled his apartment as he opened it at the kitchen table. The glow of the screen highlighted the weary determination settling into his face. He updated his resume for the first time in years, scrolling through job boards filled with positions offering market-rate pay, clear advancement paths, and professional development programs. He bookmarked several listings but didn't apply just yet. He wasn't ready to make that leap, not tonight. But something had shifted. As he stared at his newly polished resume, a quiet, steady realization took hold. For the first time in 4 years, Jared wondered what would happen if he stopped chasing Denise Callahan's approval and started thinking about what he truly deserved. Jared Monroe had never planned on working at a consulting firm. Fresh out of graduate school, he had been considering positions in research when Harrison Verline himself called him in for an interview. The founder of Verline Consulting was a man with a reputation for spotting talent, and he had spent 2 hours talking with Jared about market trends, strategic positionings, and client psychology. You've got instincts, Harrison had said with an approving smile, that's harder to teach than spreadsheet formulas. Jared remembered leaving that meeting feeling like he had just been invited into something meaningful, Veriline Consulting felt small back then, almost like a family. Harrison walked the halls, greeted employees by name, and personally checked in on big projects. It was the kind of environment Jared's parents had always told him to look for. A place where hard work and loyalty meant something. His father had spent 37 years at a manufacturing plant in Ohio, earning every promotion through persistence. Jared had grown up hearing the same advice repeated at the dinner table. Keep your head down, deliver results, and eventually you'll be rewarded. That mindset had shaped his early career, and at Veriline it seemed like he had found a place where those values still mattered. For the first 6 months, Jared worked late nights, absorbed everything he could, and earned praise from everyone, including Harrison himself. It felt like the beginning of something lasting. Then, everything changed. Harrison sold the company to a private equity firm and retired to a ranch in Montana. The news was delivered in a company-wide meeting, but the real shift came when Denise Callahan walked in a week later. She was introduced as the new operations director, brought in to modernize and expand the company. Her first speech was full of buzzwords: right-sizing, ripening sample. It all sounded efficient, professional, and forward-thinking, but it was the first sign that the family-liking atmosphere was gone. Denise's arrival marked the start of a new era, one where employees were no longer people, but metrics on a balance sheet. At first, Jared managed to stay hopeful. Denise gave him challenging assignments, and when he landed the Peterson Industries account, she even smiled and told him he had potential for advancement. That was 2 years ago, back when he still believed advancement meant more than just extra work for the same pay. Jared's numbers spoke for themselves. Peterson alone brought in $3 million, 0 cents in revenue last year, and his client retention rate remained one of the highest in the firm. Yet raises and promotions never followed. Every time he asked, Denise would say the same thing: the budget didn't allow for adjustments, maybe next quarter. As the months passed, Jared watched the company change. Talented senior analysts left for better opportunities, while Denise filled their roles with younger, cheaper hires straight out of college. The office culture shifted from collaboration to competition. People hoarded information, desperate to protect their own positions. Jared noticed he was being excluded from strategy meetings, projects he had once led now given to newer consultants under the guise of developmental opportunities. He overheard Denise on a conference call referring to legacy employees resistant to change. She hadn't said his name, but the description stung. Still, Jared stayed, convincing himself that his loyalty would eventually be rewarded. It was how he'd been raised. But as he sat in his car that evening, staring at the faint glow of his updated resume, he could no longer shake the feeling that everything he had believed about loyalty and hard work might have been wrong. The call came on a quiet Tuesday morning as Jared was reviewing quarterly projections. His phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, and when he answered, the voice on the other end introduced itself as Marcus Weller from North Glen Analytics. Jared sat up straighter at the name. Marcus Weller was a well-known figure in Portland consulting circles, a man with a reputation for building North Glen's client base by valuing both clients and employees. Tyler Mitchell suggested I give you a call, Marcus said, referencing Jared's old college roommate. I've been following your work with Peterson Industries. Impressive client retention numbers. We're expanding our strategic consulting division, and we're looking for someone with your background. Hearing those words sent a jolt through Jared. For the first time in years, someone was recognizing his contributions without him having to beg for acknowledgement. Marcus continued, "We believe in paying market rate for proven expertise. There's also equity participation for senior consultants, and performance bonuses tied directly to revenue generation." Market rate participation. Words Denise Callahan had never used in 4 years. Jared kept his voice steady, masking the excitement rising in his chest. "I'd be interested in learning more," he said. "Excellent," Marcus replied. "How about Thursday at 2 p.m.? We can discuss the position and compensation structure." Jared agreed immediately. When Thursday arrived, Jared found himself walking into North Glen Analytics' downtown office, and the contrast to Veriline Consulting was immediate. The lobby was bright with natural light, modern furniture, and an actual coffee machine instead of the vending machine swill he'd been drinking for years. Marcus met him personally in the lobby, greeting him with a firm handshake and genuine interest in what Jared had to say. There were no assistants screening him, no pretense of being too busy to care. Marcus led him into a sleek conference room, and for the next 2 hours they discussed strategy, client management, and market positioning. Marcus asked thoughtful questions and listened attentively, never glancing at his phone or rushing the conversation. When the interview concluded, Marcus leaned back with a satisfied expression. "The position comes with a 30% salary increase," he said, "plus performance bonuses tied to actual revenue, and a professional development budget of $5,000 annually. After 6 months, you'll be eligible for equity participation. Jared felt a rush of validation, stronger than anything he had experienced in years. One conversation with Marcus Weller had offered him more advancement and respect than 4 years with Denise Callahan. That weekend, Jared sat in his apartment weighing the decision. He thought about his parents, about his father's belief that loyalty paid off, and about the countless late nights he had spent making Denise look good. He stared at the printed North Glen offer on his desk, feeling the weight of the choice. By Sunday night, he had made up his mind. He would give Denise one last chance to make things right. If she failed, he already knew where he belonged. Jared arrived early Monday morning, his decision firmly made. He had spent the weekend reviewing salary surveys, compiling data, and printing reports from 3 separate industry sources. By the time Denise walked into her office, coffee in hand, Jared was waiting at her door. She glanced up with mild irritation as he knocked. "What can I do for you, Jared?" she asked, her tone already dismissive. "I'd like to discuss my compensation," Jared began, keeping his voice steady. "It's been over a year since my last review, and I believe it's time we addressed my salary. Based on my research, I'm currently earning 23% below market rate for senior consultants in Portland." He placed the documents on her desk. Denise glanced at them briefly before leaning back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Market rates are inflated," she said finally, her voice tinged with condescension. "Companies are overpaying to attract talent, but it's not sustainable. We prefer to invest in long-term stability rather than chase arbitrary benchmarks." Jared didn't flinch. "This isn't arbitrary. I've generated over $12 million in revenue for this company in the past 4 years. The Peterson Industries account alone covers my salary for 3 years. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for fair compensation based on performance." Denise's expression hardened as she stood and walked toward the window, staring out at the parking lot where Jared's Honda Civic sat parked beside her leased BMW. "You know what your problem is, Jared? You're not thinking strategically. You're focused on short-term gains instead of long-term career building." Jared looked at her calmly. "What exactly does long-term career building look like here? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like 4 more years of the same conversation." Denise turned back to face him, her tone dropping to the cold, measured cadence she used with difficult clients. "Maybe we need to reassess whether your expectations align with this company's culture. Some people thrive in environments that prioritize team success over individual recognition. Others need constant validation." The implication was clear. "I'm not looking for validation," Jared said, his voice even. "I'm looking for compensation that reflects my contribution." Denise shrugged. "I'm telling you that's not possible right now. If that's unacceptable to you, maybe you need to consider whether this is the right fit for your career goals." Jared stood, gathering his papers. "I appreciate your honesty. I'll think about what you've said." He didn't need to think. That afternoon, he called Marcus Weller and accepted the offer at North Glen Analytics. The employment agreement arrived Wednesday, and Jared signed it that evening. Thursday morning, he printed his resignation letter. Professional, concise, and polite. But Denise moved first. Friday morning, Kelly called him into Denise's office. She sat behind her desk with a folder open, her expression cold. "Close the door and have a seat," she said. "I received an interesting call yesterday from North Glen Analytics. They mentioned interviewing a Vereline employee for a senior consulting position." Jared placed his resignation letter on her desk. "Actually, we do need an honest conversation. This is my resignation. I've accepted a position at North Glen, effective 2 weeks from today." Denise scanned the letter, her face shifting from surprise to anger to icy calculation. "This is incredibly disappointing, Jared. After everything we've invested in your career, you're walking away for what? A few thousand more a year?" "This isn't about a few $1,000s, Jared replied. "It's about being valued. About working for a company that sees employees as an investment, not an expense." Denise's voice sharpened. "And you think North Glen is different? They recruited you for one reason: access to our clients and business strategies. Your decision raises concerns about confidentiality and professional ethics." Jared kept his voice calm. "All company information stays with the company. That's standard practice." Denise's thin smile returned. "Nevertheless, consider this your last day. Kelly will observe while you pack. Your access to company systems has already been revoked." Jared nodded once. Understood. 20 minutes later, Kelly stood awkwardly by his desk as Jared packed his coffee mug, desk plant, and a framed photo of his parents into a cardboard box. The office watched silently, some sympathetic, others simply curious. Denise had turned resignations into theater, and Jared was the latest performance. As he loaded the box into his Honda Civic, he felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. Denise had removed any lingering guilt or doubt. She had made it clear that leaving wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Jared sat at his desk in his new office at North Glen, reviewing quarterly projections when his phone buzzed. It was Marcus Weller, his voice steady but carrying a hint of anticipation. "Jared, I thought you should know something up front," Marcus said. "Denise Callahan called here this morning, tried to make you sound like a disgruntled employee who couldn't handle change. She said you might have issues with loyalty and professionalism." Jared expected as much and leaned back in his chair, almost amused by how predictable she had become. "I'm guessing she framed it as a concern for your firm's integrity," Jared replied. Marcus chuckled. "Pretty much. But here's the thing. She underestimated how much we actually value results. I told her we don't take hiring advice from a company losing top clients. You're doing great work here, and we trust your professionalism completely." Those words hit harder than Jared expected. Trust was something he hadn't felt at Verline for years, and hearing it now felt like validation he didn't know he needed. 6 weeks later, Marcus called Jared into his office with a folder in hand. "This might interest you," Marcus said, sliding it across the table. Jared opened it and froze for a moment when he saw the name on the first page. Peterson Industries. The same Peterson account he had built and maintained for 2 years at Verline. "They reached out to us," Marcus explained, his tone measured. "They're not happy with Verlink. Service quality has dropped since you left. Missed deadlines, poor communication, junior consultants trying to handle high-level strategy. They specifically asked for you to lead the transition." Jared flipped through the attached emails, reading every line carefully. One from Peterson's CEO stood out. "Things haven't been the same since Jared Monroe left. We need a consulting partner who values relationships as much as results." Jared set the folder down, a quiet but deep satisfaction forming in his chest. This wasn't just business. It was proof that integrity and client trust outlasted corporate politics. "Are you ready to take this on?" Marcus asked, watching him closely. Jared didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." For the next week, Jared poured himself into the proposal. Every late night spent drafting strategic frameworks, market analysis, and transition timelines felt less like work and more like a statement. He made sure every detail reflected the professionalism Verline had undervalued for years. On Thursday afternoon, he walked into Peterson's sleek downtown conference room, its glass walls overlooking the river. The leadership team sat waiting, curious and attentive. 30 minutes into the presentation, the CEO asked the question Jared had expected. How do we ensure a smooth transition from Verline to North Glen without disrupting ongoing projects? Jared kept his voice calm, steady, and deliberate. Seamless transition is what we do best. We'll coordinate directly with Verline to protect your operations, though given recent service issues, I suspect they won't prioritize cooperation. Our commitment is to your success, not theirs. The CEO smiled slightly at the diplomatic but pointed remark. 2 hours later, after detailed discussions and multiple rounds of questions, Peterson signed the agreement. The 3-year contract, worth $6,800,000, 0 cents, was more than just a win for North Glen. The following Monday, Peterson Industries issued a press release praising North Glen for its innovative approach, dedication to client success, and investment in professional excellence. The statement was a subtle but unmistakable dig at Verline, whose name had once been synonymous with stability in Portland's consulting market. Jared sat in his office that morning, reading the article in the local business journal, a small but genuine smile crossing his face. The company that dismissed him as replaceable had just lost one of its largest accounts because of the very qualities it had ignored. For Jared, it wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about proving to himself and everyone watching that knowing your worth was the most powerful move you could ever make. Jared sat in his office at North Glen on a cool Friday morning, reviewing reports, when an email notification appeared in his inbox. The subject line read, Portland Business Journal. Verline announces leadership restructuring. He opened it, reading each line carefully. Verline had officially lost Peterson Industries, followed by 2 additional mid-sized accounts. The public statement cited organizational restructuring to better align with evolving client needs, but the article's tone left little doubt that this was a response to the growing perception that Verline was struggling to retain both talent and clients. Buried near the end of the article was the line Jared had been expecting. Denise Callahan's position had been eliminated as part of a strategic realignment. Jared leaned back in his chair, taking a slow breath. There was no satisfaction in the news, no surge of triumph, only quiet acknowledgement. Actions had consequences. For years, Denise had treated employees as disposable and clients as guaranteed revenue streams. Now, both groups had walked away, and the company she tried to modernize was paying the price. Jared closed the article and turned back to his reports. His focus was on the future, not the past. Life at North Glen was different in ways Jared still appreciated every day. His new office had natural lighting, comfortable furniture, and, most importantly, an atmosphere where employees were valued. Conversations with Marcus Weller weren't about squeezing more work out of fewer people. They were about building sustainable growth and rewarding excellence. Jared had just completed a major quarterly review that highlighted North Glen's increased market share, and his own name was attached to two of the firm's largest new contracts. The recognition wasn't just verbal either. His performance bonus had been approved within a week, and a portion of it was already invested through the company's equity participation program. For the first time in his career, Jared felt like his contributions mattered to the people signing his paycheck. 2 weeks later, his parents flew out to visit him in Portland. They'd heard about his career move, but seeing it firsthand was different. Jared gave them a tour of the North Glen office, introducing them to Marcus, who greeted them warmly and spoke highly of Jared's work. His father, a man who had spent nearly 4 decades at the same manufacturing plant in Ohio, seemed impressed by the professional respect Jared had earned in such a short time. That evening, they had dinner at a small restaurant downtown. Over plates of grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, his father finally asked the question Jared had been expecting. "So, how did you know it was the right time to leave?" Jared set his fork down, meeting his father's curious gaze. "Sometimes you have to walk away from what's comfortable to find what's right," Jared said quietly. His father nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking in. "To me, though a long time to learn that myself," he admitted. Jared smiled faintly. "You taught me loyalty, Dad. But you also taught me to know my worth. This was the first time I acted on both." His father reached across the table, squeezing his shoulder, a silent gesture of pride. For Jared, it felt like closure. On years of undervaluation, and on the doubt that had once kept him chained to Verline's empty promises. Jared sat in his North Glen office on a quiet Thursday morning, sunlight streaming through the large windows that overlooked the city. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. The rush of winning big contracts, the satisfaction of outperforming expectations, all of that mattered. But what mattered most was the realization that this journey had never been just about money. It had been about respect. Respect for his work, for his expertise, and for the years he had spent honing his skills while being treated like just another cog in a machine. At Verline, respect had been a word tossed around in meetings, something they claimed to value but never actually delivered. Here, every meeting, every handshake, every decision reflected it. Jared leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath, letting that truth settle. Leaving Verline had been one of the hardest decisions of his life, but sitting here now, he couldn't imagine ever going back to the way things had been. Professional recognition came quickly. Within weeks of securing the Peterson Industries contract, industry journals began running articles about the consulting shift. North Glen Analytics secures landmark $6,800,000 0 contract, one headline read, followed by a piece in the Portland Business Review calling it a strategic coup signaling a shift in Portland's consulting power dynamics. Jared's name was mentioned specifically as the lead consultant responsible for the transition. Former colleagues from Verline reached out quietly, some congratulating him, others asking if North Glen was hiring. Even competitors began taking notice, with Marcus forwarding Jared an email from a prospective client who'd requested a meeting, specifically with the consultant who handled Peterson's turnaround. It wasn't just about closing deals, it was about reputation. Jared was no longer just a mid-level consultant hoping for someone else's approval. He was becoming known as a principled, strategic professional who delivered results and valued both clients and the people he worked with. That, more than anything, felt like vindication. Later that afternoon, Jared sat alone in his office, the hum of city traffic faintly audible through the glass. His desk was neatly organized, the kind of order he hadn't been able to maintain in the chaos of Verline's endless last-minute demands. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, a picture of him with his parents taken during their recent visit, all three of them smiling. His eyes drifted to the corner of the office where he kept a small notebook, filled with notes and reminders for upcoming projects. For a brief moment, his thoughts returned to those 4 frustrating years. He could almost hear Denise Callahan's voice saying, "Next quarter, maybe," that practiced dismissive tone she used to keep employees hopeful, but stagnant. Jared smiled, a quiet, almost amused smile. He didn't need her approval. He never had. What he had needed was to stop waiting for someone else to recognize his worth. That realization had changed everything. As he turned back to his work, his phone buzzed with a new message from Marcus. "Great job on the latest client pitch. This is just the beginning." Jared allowed himself another small smile. He knew Marcus was right. For the first time in his career, he was exactly where he was meant to be, and it was all because he'd finally believed in himself.